The arena was endless, an ocean of skulls and brass under a sky that bled. Every breath tasted of iron. Every footfall echoed with the laughter of a god who took joy in pain. Where mortal warriors would have collapsed under such torments, the man from another universe stood, his muscles trembling beneath the weight of chains forged from divine hatred, his mind a storm of memory and resolve. Demons came in waves. Beasts fused with engines hurled themselves from the shadows with claws like swords and spines as sharp as lies. Before we descend into the chaos of this tale, make sure to subscribe to the channel for more legends and dark histories from the Warhammer 40K universe. With calm certainty, his gaze followed their charge, not with fear but with the cold calculation of someone who had seen genocide and refused to be broken by it. The first creature lunged. Metal sang in the air. A chain snapped. The beast crashed into the sand, its skull crushed by the invisible force of will made manifest. The crowd roared, chains rattled, fire fell from the sky. Each battle bled into the next. Time in the warp had no meaning. What had been minutes became years, or perhaps the space between heartbeats. With each foe, bones cracked beneath pressure that could bend titans. With each victory, pain seared across skin marked by centuries of scars. He felt the weight of the Orkish chants that still echoed through the Imperium, their belief feeding the fire around him. They shouted for their metal god. They celebrated each kill as if it were a feast. Yet inside, the man who once walked under human stars carried something heavier than the chains binding his limbs. The memory of children screaming in concentration camps, the scent of burning hair, the taste of dirt and blood in Auschwitz's yards. Those memories lent him a different strength. Rage that did not burn out, sorrow that did not fade. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, names of those he'd lost whispered between the crack of bone and the hiss of demonic blades. Each name was a vow. Each breath was a prayer to no God at all. In this place, gods thrived on worship. Khorne demanded blood, Slaanesh craved sensation, Tzint sought change. Nurgle whispered decay. All of them waited for him to fall to his knees. He refused. He would not scream. He would not beg. He lifted chains from the ground like ribbons and used them as weapons. He tore armor from flesh with unseen hands. He pulled iron from the sands and shaped it into shields. More demons came. His heartbeat slowed. His focus sharpened. The universe narrowed to the curve of a claw, the flicker of a flame, the tension in a chain just before it snapped. Hours stretched into eternity, and still he stood. The god watching from above bellowed with laughter, shaking the Colosseum, but the Colosseum shook for another reason as well. With each act of defiance, the fabric of the arena trembled. It was subtle at first, the slightest quiver in the brass under his feet, the faintest ripple in the air. Demons did not notice. Gods did not yet care. But something was changing. It was not just his body that broke and healed in an endless cycle. It was not just the chains that cracked under the constant pressure of will. It was the very essence of the warp around him. The Imperium was fluid, shaped by minds and souls. Where other beings bent beneath its tides, he had become a pillar against the current. In his mind, the screams of Auschwitz overlapped with the howls of Orks, the whispered lies of Tzint with the propaganda of human tyrants. Grief and rage intertwined until they were indistinguishable. Through that storm, his will focused on a singular truth. He would not kneel again, not for any god, not for any emperor, not for anyone. Each demon that fell added weight to that truth. Each roar from the crowd was swallowed by an internal whisper. I am Magneto. The section ended not with triumph, but with a breath drawn slowly amid the stench of blood, a breath that carried a longing for peace across eternity. The fights blurred together until time was a smear of motion and pain. Yet between the thunderous roars of chain and claw, subtle changes began to emerge. The arena was not only a prison, it was also a stage built from the nightmares of countless souls. Under the pressure of his defiance, cracks spidered through its foundations. They appeared first as faint lines along the brass walls, hairline fractures that only those attuned to the whisper of metal could sense. With calm certainty, he ran fingertips along them during brief lulls in the carnage, feeling the tremor beneath. The gods thought this was their realm, immutable and eternal. but there was nothing eternal about an idea confronted by unrelenting will. It was in one of these moments, standing amid steaming piles of demonic viscera, that a flicker of light danced across his vision. Not the crimson glare of warp fire or the sickly green of orcish belief, but something colder, sharper, an azure thread weaving through the air like the tail of a comet. The man followed it with weary eyes. It drifted toward one of the fractures in the wall and vanished. Beneath the roar of demons, another sound came, almost imperceptible, like pages turning in a vast library. The arena shuddered again. Dust fell from above. He reached out with his mind, feeling for the weakness, prying gently at the flaw. Metal responded. Brass shivered. A piece of the wall came loose and clattered to the sand. It was small, a shard no larger than a finger, but it was enough to let a whisper in. The whisper was not in any language he knew. It was a sensation, a brush of curiosity mixed with fear, like eyes peering through a crack in a door. There were others outside, watching through the walls of the arena. He sensed minds, sharp and ancient, gazing at him through the fracture. Eldar, their thoughts tasted of starlight and sorrow. Farseers, perhaps, drawn by the gravity of his defiance. He heard no words, but he felt their question. Why do you fight? Why refuse what cannot be refused? Images flashed behind his eyes, children's corpses, mutant bodies thrown into pits, friends who had died because humanity feared difference. The answer formed not as speech but as certainty. Because chains, no matter who forges them, are chains. Because no one should decide your fate but you. The Eldar presence lingered, then withdrew, leaving behind a thread of hope. There were eyes beyond the arena. There was a universe still. The crack widened. The demons sensed the change too late. As another wave came roaring from the gates, he used the moment between his heartbeats to grasp the edges of the fracture with his power. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, names of the dead like a mantra. His mind pushed. Metal groaned. The crack became a rift. Air hissed through the gap. For a breath, he saw stars, distant, cold points of light flickering beyond the warp. The sight hit him like a blow. Real space was still there, a universe of bone and steel and dreams. The Colosseum lurched. Khorne's laughter faltered for a heartbeat. Demons stumbled as the ground shifted beneath them. And in that heartbeat, something else slipped through the gap. A shadow, slender and strange, flickering with spectral energy. It wrapped around his wrist for an instant. A bracelet carved from wraithbone, perhaps, or something older. It hummed with power, and when his fingers closed around it, the chains binding him snapped as if they were made of twine. Freedom, even momentary, was a shock. The weight vanished. Muscle memory kicked in. He moved with the grace of a man who had trained his body to be a weapon long before he had known he could tear metal from the earth. Chains became whips, shackles became projectiles. Demons howled as their weapons bent, as their bodies were crushed by forces they could not comprehend. Khorne roared in rage and glee. His laughter filled the arena. This was what he wanted, to see a mortal rage against the impossible. But he did not see the crack widen further, did not see the threads of another fate woven between the fractures. In the whirlwind of combat, a decision coalesced within the man standing amid blood and brass. He would not die here. He would not remain their entertainment. He would tear down their walls if he had to tear down the gods themselves. The section closed with him pressing his palm against the widening crack, feeling the chill of stars on the other side. The Imperium is a sea of thought and madness where intention shapes matter and belief becomes blade. Most who enter are swept away by tides they cannot see. In that place of chaos, a mind as focused as his was a blade honed for a single purpose, liberation. But the warp is not merely a battleground. It is also a marketplace of bargains whispered in the dark. As the fractures spread through the arena, as the brass Colosseum groaned under the strain of defiance, new whispers came, not from Eldar watchers, but from within the warp itself. Threads of azure light coiled together, forming a swirling vortex in the air. Feathers materialized from nothing, drifting like falling snow. The laughter of 1,000 voices echoed in his skull, all speaking at once, all contradictory. Change approached. The being that stepped through was not wholly present. It flickered between forms, one moment an avian creature with eyes like stars, the next a swirling mass of runes and smoke. It wore a grin carved from possibilities. Its presence tasted of secrets and schemes and the joy of watching plans unfold across centuries. It spoke without sound, its words landing in his mind like the flutter of wings. Magnanimous one, it said with all the sincerity of a serpent. Why exhaust yourself against chains when I can offer you keys? Why fight alone when the tides of fate can bear you to freedom? With calm certainty, he regarded the creature. It was one of Tzinch's mouths, a lord of change perhaps, an emissary of the god who loved to twist destinies. Under his breath, the words came steady and low in his own head, not to answer the demon, but to remind himself of what lay behind him. Auschwitz, Xavier's dream, the faces of Orkish mobs who believed in him. He knew the cost of bargains with gods. He had watched friends become slaves to ideals once held sacred. He had seen men in suits trade entire populations for whispered promises of power. The demon leaned closer, its eyes multiplicative, each showing a different future. In one, he stood at the head of an imperial fleet, crushing tyrannids with a thought. In another, he sat on the golden throne with horns sprouting from his brow, his body half iron, half flesh. In a third, he lay broken on a field of skulls, his head bowed beneath a crown of brass. The choices were infinite, the roads endless. The creature offered them all. Choose, it said, any path but this one, any fate but endless fighting. Give me your rage, and I will give you the galaxy. The offer coiled around him like smoke, tempting in its expansiveness. He remembered men in uniforms offering him safety if he betrayed his people. He remembered politicians promising rights if he hid his true self, bargains that always cost the soul. He stepped back, feeling the bracelet at his wrist pulse with energy not his own. The crack in the arena wall continued to widen behind him, cold starlight spilling through. He sensed Tzinch's eyes follow his gaze, curiosity sharpening into hunger. With calm certainty, he spoke into the mind of the thing before him, not with words, but with the raw edge of his will. Destiny is not a river to be ridden. It is a chain, and I have never worn chains willingly. The being flickered, its smile curdling into disdain, then curiosity again. There are more gods than blood and change, it whispered. Others watch you. Others would make you their own. Nurgle could offer you peace. Slaanesh could soothe your sorrow. Even your emperor would open his arms if you brought him this tide of green. It spread its wings, feathers dripping with shimmering slime. Choose, mortal, choose. He chose to close his fist. Chains shattered. The brass beneath his feet cracked further. The creature hissed, its faces shifting. You will regret this. It laughed and vanished into a flurry of parchment and cackles. Its departure left behind a sudden silence, a moment where only the crackle of demonic blood steaming on cooling brass filled the air. The fractures widened. The structural integrity of the arena faltered, not because the gods willed it, but because a man refused. In that moment he sensed other eyes turned toward him, not avian but decayed, not of change but of rot. Nurgle's garden had noticed. The section ended with a shiver crawling up his spine, a new scent in the air, a sweetness masking rot, a promise of relief hiding decay. A new scent wound through the iron tang of blood and the acrid stench of warp fire. It was cloying, sweet as honey, masking something rotten beneath. From the widening fissure seeped a mist, pale and luminescent, and with it came the sound of buzzing flies. The air grew thicker. The brass of the arena tarnished, green oxidation spreading like moss. Where the mist touched demon corpses, their wounds festered, blossoms of fungus sprouting from torn flesh. A laughter rumbled, deep and jolly, incongruous against the screams of the arena. It came from everywhere and nowhere, a rolling mirth that shook bone and bowels alike. Papa has noticed you, whispered a voice like wet earth. Papa has seen your pain. Through the mist, a figure took shape, bloated, hulking, its skin cracked and oozing, flowers growing from open sores. It was both grotesque and somehow comforting, the embodiment of rot and renewal. Eyes filled with maggots looked upon him with what could almost be called love. The Lord of Decay lifted one swollen hand, beckoning like a grandmother calling children to supper. You are tired, it crooned. You are wounded. Let go. Lay down your burdens. Accept my gift. You will not feel pain again. You will not feel sorrow. All things end. All things decay. There is peace in letting go. The promise wrapped around him like a warm blanket. In that moment, he could almost feel the weight lift from his shoulders, the screams silenced, the endless battles fading. He saw the faces of friends who had died far from their homes. He saw the terrified eyes of mutant children begging him for salvation he could not always provide. He saw his own hands stained with blood, shaking with rage. How easy it would be to rest in the embrace of rot, to surrender to a tide that promised no more suffering. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, a litany of names that anchored him to what he had lost and what he still fought for. His grip tightened on the bracelet that pulsed with alien energy at his wrist. The scent of decay thickened. Flies crawled across his skin, whispering promises of release. For a heartbeat, his vision wavered. The Rot Lord's laughter deepened, sensing an opening. Let go, child. Let go and be free of the iron and fire. Accept the love of grandfather and rest in the garden. Images fluttered behind his eyes like leaves. A garden of fungal growth under a yellow sun. Children playing among spores, bodies merging with soil in peaceful oblivion. The comfort was almost overwhelming. Then through the haze, another image cut through like a knife. A boy named Peter lying in rubble, dying because humans feared his mutation. A girl named Ileana reaching for a hand that never came. There had been no peace for them. Why should he have any? He remembered a day when he had held his daughter's body in his arms, her life taken by those who believed they were purifying the world. There had been no garden then. There had been screams, torches, bullets. He tasted ashes again. With calm certainty, he lifted his hand, not to accept the gift, but to reject it. Metal sang, chains snapped. The flies turned to sparks as his will burned through the rot. The mist recoiled, hissing. The bloated figure's smile did not falter. It only widened, oozing. Very well, it sighed, voice dripping with sticky affection. Refuse my love now, but know that all things come to me in the end. I am patient. I am eternal. When your bones rot and your tears dry, you will join my garden. It faded back into the crack, laughter trailing like a rotten breeze. The scent lingered, mixing with blood and sweat. He wiped maggots from his skin with a thought. He did not speak. The battle resumed. The section ended with a breath, half sob, half sigh. A breath that carried both relief and dread, for he knew the Rot God's words were not threats but truths about mortality. The fractures continued to widen under his relentless pressure. Each crack in the brass let through not just starlight but whispers from beyond. No sooner had the rot receded than the air shimmered with a sensual hum. The temperature rose. The brass of the arena began to glow with an inner light, not from fire but from something like passion. A sweet melody drifted, a tune that seemed to be half lullaby, half lover's sigh. Shapes danced at the edge of his vision, sinuous and enticing. Colors brightened, hues that should not exist in the grim palette of this realm blossomed like exotic flowers. The smell of death was replaced by perfumes so intoxicating they made his head swim. A figure emerged from the light, its form shifting constantly, at once male and female, angel and serpent, friend and lover, its voice a thousand whispers speaking directly into his heart. Poor thing, it purred, notes of compassion threaded with hunger. You have carried sorrow for so long. You have worn chains forged from pain and grief. Let me take them from you. Let me show you joy beyond any you've known. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, a mantra of names, but they felt weaker here, as if the very air tried to make him forget. The figure moved closer, its eyes twin stars of violet, filled with promises. It showed him images, not of war, but of peace. He saw a world of quiet forests and clear lakes where mutants walked without fear. He saw his wife alive, her hand in his, their children laughing among the trees. He saw Xavier's dream realized, humans and mutants working together, no sentinels patrolling the skies. The images were so vivid his heart ached. Tears sprang unbidden. For a moment, grief threatened to melt into longing. Would it be so wrong to accept this? Had he not suffered enough? The figure's voice caressed his ears like silk. Let go of your rage. Embrace the only thing that can heal it. You deserve happiness. You deserve pleasure. Give me your pain. I will give you bliss. It extended a hand, slender fingers tipped with claws dipped in starlight. He reached out not to take the hand, but to brush away a tear with a finger made of iron. The images shimmered. Underneath the idyllic scenes, he glimpsed something else. Bodies lying in decadent heaps, their eyes glazed with euphoria, drool trailing from mouths, souls lost in endless indulgence, warriors drowned in sensations until they forgot their names. He saw Genosha in flames. He saw Auschwitz. Pleasure had been denied to him not because he was unworthy, but because others had deemed him less. He thought of his wife's smile, of his children's laughter. Those were not gifts to be bartered for. They were memories carved into his bones. He closed his fist again. The bracelet pulsed, releasing a shockwave of will. The melody faltered. The figure hissed, its alluring face twisting into a mask of hunger. "You spurn me," it cried, its voice like nails on glass. "You would rather bleed than feel joy. You are a fool, and you will never know beauty again." The vision shattered like glass. The colors bled into darkness. The scent of perfume turned acrid. Pleasure retreated, leaving behind a hollow ache. But within that ache there was also clarity. Joy could not be gifted by gods. It had to be wrestled from an unjust universe. The section closed on that thought, his breath steadying as he embraced not bliss but resolve. The arena could not hold forever against a will that refused to break. Each confrontation with divinity had weakened the structure, each refusal a hammer blow against foundations laid by gods. The cracks spidered further. The stars beyond grew brighter. With calm certainty, he placed his hands on the brass wall, feeling it vibrate. Demons lunged toward him. Chains whistled through the air. He moved without looking, sending shards of iron through throats, wrapping chains around horns and snapping them like twigs. The bracelet on his wrist glowed, responding to the otherworldly energies flowing through the fracture. His mind stretched through metal and void. He felt the weight of the Orkish chants in real space, their faith like a tide pushing him from behind. He felt the Eldar's distant hope, the Imperium's dread, the warp god's rage. All of it converged here in this place of blood and brass, where a single man stood between submission and freedom. He pushed, metal groaned like a dying beast. The wall bowed, the Colosseum shook. Khorne bellowed from his throne, his laughter turning to a roar of anger. The ground split, demons stumbled. Some were crushed beneath falling skulls. Flames roared as gouts of warp energy burst from the cracks. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, names of the dead mixing with words of power he had learned from ancient tomes and modern science. Electromagnetic forces surged through the brass. Atoms repelled each other. Bonds snapped. With a crack like thunder, the wall tore open. The arena was suddenly flooded with cold starlight. The air that rushed in tasted cleaner than anything in the warp. He saw, beyond the breach, the roiling tides of the Imperium, colors and currents swirling in madness. Freedom lay not in a peaceful meadow, but in a storm of ghosts and gods. Still, it was freedom. Demons screamed, recoiling from the light. Khorne rose from his throne, a mountain of muscle and anger, axe raised. He leaped toward the gap, determined to close it, to drag his reluctant champion back into the pit. With calm certainty, the man turned to face the god, not with worship, not with fear, but with the same defiance that had shattered chains. The bracelet hummed. Wraithbone flared. Eldar craftsmanship met mutant will. He raised his hands. Iron rose from the arena floor in twin pillars, slamming into the blood god's limbs, pinning him for a heartbeat. That heartbeat was enough. He stepped through the breach. The sensation was like being torn apart and rebuilt, reality inverted. The warp, thick as tar, clung to him as he passed. Voices screamed in 1,000 tongues. Light bent. For a moment he felt every nerve in his body ignite, his atoms stretching across an impossible distance. Then suddenly he was free of brass and skulls. He stood suspended in the immaterium, a maelstrom of colors and thoughts swirling around him. There was no ground, only currents of raw emotion and belief. Islands of reality flickered in and out of existence. He was no longer bound. The bracelet on his wrist pulsed softly, its alien glow a beacon. He took a breath that had no air, tasting both ozone and memory. His heart slowed. He realized that though the Colosseum lay behind, the war had not ended. It had only escalated. The section ended with him floating amid the warp's hurricane, the weight of infinite eyes upon him, a whisper of freedom drowned in the roar of gods. Freedom was not a clear path but a tempest. The moment he tore himself from the arena, the Imperium swallowed him whole. It was a sea without horizon or floor, where emotions became storms and thoughts became currents. He drifted, or perhaps he flew. Direction had no meaning. Around him, rivers of raw psychic energy twisted like serpents, each stream pulsing with the beliefs of trillions. One current carried the prayers of Imperial faithful, thin, desperate threads of hope woven through a tapestry of fear. Another roiled with the green psychic tide of Orks, their laughter and war cries blending into a single, crushing wave. He felt them both not as distant sounds but as pressure against his mind. The Orkish chant of his name throbbed like a heartbeat, each pulse reinforcing the storm that surrounded him. Magneto, Magneto, Magneto. It was both a weight and a wind at his back, propelling him forward while trying to pull him into myths. He grasped for something solid. There was no earth, but there was metal, always metal. Hidden in the currents were broken hulls of ships lost to the warp, fragments of debris from wars fought a millennium ago, even the tiny iron cores of meteoroids swallowed by the tides. He reached out, willed them closer. The fragments whirled toward him, coalescing into a swirling shield. Anchored by iron and his will, he began to push against the currents. Each stroke was a mental effort, not against water, but against the very emotions of sentient beings. The prayers of Imperial soldiers tugged at him, pleading for deliverance from Xenos and demons. He felt their terror, their pain, their indoctrinated hatred of all that was different. Memories of his own persecution stirred. He clenched his jaw, let sorrow become a blade, and cut through the current. The tide of Orkish belief was even stronger, a green river of raw joy in battle. It threatened to sweep him away into their endless war. He held on, feeling their faith in him as both chain and rope. Each chant fed him power, yet each chant also tightened the identity they demanded. Metal God, banner of iron. He whispered into the storm that he did not want to be their god, but the warp did not listen. It only reflected belief. Lighting crackled across the horizonless expanse, not of electricity, but of pure thought. He saw shadows moving within it, giant shapes that might have been Tyranid hive ships, their minds a cold hunger even here. Spectral fires that could only be chaos warbands tearing through reality, glimpses of craftworlds sailing the tides on engines of psychic geometry. He drifted closer to one shimmering shape and saw, for a heartbeat, human souls chained within an Imperial ship, astropaths screaming as warp energies devoured their voices. He flinched away. Another shape glowed, an Eldar vessel cutting through the storm like a blade of starlight, its wraithbone hull resonating with a song older than humanity. He felt something brush against his mind, a thought bright and questioning. He did not answer yet. He was still moving, still learning to navigate a realm without rules. Or perhaps with rules he had yet to learn. The section ended with him riding the currents deeper into the warp, iron swirling around him like a cocoon, his eyes fixed on a distant glow that might have been hope, might have been another storm. While he fought storms in the Imperium, real space trembled under the echoes of his defiance. Across the poisoned skies of Grander Prime, the citadel of iron stood empty. Ork warbands milled about, confused but not disheartened. They debated in guttural shouts, fists and axes solving questions of leadership. They painted his glyph on their armor and bellowed his name to the sky, believing he would return because stories of gods always promised return. Their psychic field pulsed, their collective belief a beacon brighter than any lighthouse. The tide of green warships drifting in orbit grew restless. Captains argued, fists shattered consoles, but all agreed on one thing: they would not leave until their metal god came back or told them to go. The Wa did not stall, it simmered. In the high towers of Terra, the lords of the Imperium gathered to interpret the omens. Robot Gilliman listened to reports from inquisitors and navigators who had felt a shift in the warp. Astropaths spoke of a disturbance not unlike the birth of a demon prince, yet different. They described it as a void, a pulling force that drew prayers and curses alike. Vox transmissions crackled with Orcish chants repeating one name. Some High Lords argued it was time to unleash exterminatus upon Grander Prime, to cleanse the sector with holy fire. Others urged caution, fearing what might happen if millions of Orcs unified under a banner directed by a will not their own. The Inquisition whispered about a man turned into an idea, and ideas were harder to kill than any heretic. Guilliman frowned, his brow carved with worry. He had seen demigods rise and fall. He had seen Primarchs return only to become monsters. Yet this was different. This was a mutant from another galaxy-wielding power that rivaled the Emperor's, shaping Orcish destiny by accident. He ordered more ships to watch the green tide, more astropaths to listen, more Grey Knights to pray. At his side, Malkador's surviving teachings whispered caution. Sometimes the greatest threats were not those who desired conquest, but those who desired peace but were denied it. On craftworlds hidden in the nebulae, Eldar seers sat in circles, their hands resting on stones carved from dying suns. They heard the same name whispered through the webway. They saw the strands of fate bending around a human mutant who refused all gods. Visions flickered of stars going dark, of Orc fleets breaking upon the Eldar's own, of the warp itself tearing. Some argued he should be guided. Others insisted he must be eliminated before his defiance shattered the precarious balance between chaos and order. Far off in the eastern fringe, Tyranid hive fleets altered course. The hive mind felt a disturbance in its endless hunger, a pull toward a feast of psychic energy. It sent tendrils of thought toward the source. And through all these responses, through prayers and curses, through songs and screams, one truth resonated. A single man's refusal had become a galactic event. The section lingered on the image of Guilliman's gaze darkening as he stared at a holomap dotted with green markers, whispering to himself that if this continues, the galaxy may bend and break in ways even the Emperor had not foreseen. In the warp, amidst currents of thought and belief, a song approached. It was not a siren's call like Slanesh-s, nor a deceptive chant like Tzinch-s. It was a melody of regret and endurance, sung in a language older than any human tongue. It wrapped around him like cool water, soothing without dulling, guiding without pulling. He turned toward it, iron shards swirling around his body like a protective halo. The song resolved into voices, clear and layered, each note carrying 1,000 years of memory. He felt a presence brush his mind, bright and sad, like sunlight filtered through stained glass. "We see you," the thought came not as command but as acknowledgement. "We have watched your struggle. We have seen your refusal. We admire it." The Eldar mind hesitated on the last word, tasting it as if it were forbidden. A shape appeared not as an apparition but as a reflection. A Farseer's ghostly silhouette formed from threads of wraithbone and warp light. Its features were delicate, angular eyes like pools of midnight. It bowed its head slightly, a gesture of respect between warriors. "You wield power in ways no human should," it sent with calm certainty, "yet you do not succumb. You tear metal like cloth, you break chains forged by gods, yet you remain yourself. We call you Iron Weaver." He felt the weight of the title and remembered other names he'd been given: mutant, terrorist, savior, monster. Iron Weaver settled somewhere among them, neither curse nor praise. "We seek to offer counsel," the Farseer continued. The eye of terror stirs. "Your defiance has drawn attention not just from the blood god but from the great enemy as a whole. If you continue to tear at the foundations of the warp, you may shatter more than the Colosseum. You may break the barriers that keep reality from plunging into madness. Is that your intent?" Under his breath, the words came steady and low, his responses forming not as speech but as ripples in the psychic medium. "I want to be free. I want them to stop forcing me to fight their wars." The Farseer nodded, understanding deeper than words. "We seek the same," it admitted. "We exist by running, by dodging, by glimpsing futures and avoiding them. We wish to avoid total collapse. Perhaps our paths align." There was a pause filled with images shared between minds. Eldar craftworlds drifting on currents of fate, Orc fleets blazing with green fire, Tyranid void creatures devouring suns, Imperial worlds crumbling under the weight of faith. The Farseer offered a vision of a different path, a strand where he did not become a god of orcs, where he led them not to the eye of terror, but away from it, toward battles that would bleed off their psychic tide without tearing reality. It showed him glyphs of routes through the warp, safer channels hidden from demons, hidden even from the Imperium. It showed him stones carved from wraithbone that could anchor him, could dampen the orcish belief. It was guidance, not command. He considered trust was not something easily given. Eldar minds were sharp and secretive, yet they had given him a bracelet when he was bound. They had widened the crack. They had not yet asked him to serve them. With calm certainty, he extended a thought. Show me the way, not as a leash, but as a star chart. I will not be your tool. The Farseer smiled, or the psychic impression of a smile brushed his mind. We would not insult the Iron Weaver with chains. It extended ghostly hands, offering a strand of psychic light. When he took it, images filled his mind, a path through the warp like a filament through a spider's web, weaving between storms, avoiding eyes. He felt the Farseer's final thought. Remember, even a path offered freely can become a trap if you take it without seeing where it leads. The section ended with the strand wrapped around his wrist alongside the wraithbone bracelet, a guide and a warning, as he turned back toward realspace with a newfound direction. The warp's currents thinned. The shimmering strands the Farseer had given him guided his way like invisible rails. He followed them with the focus of a man threading a needle through a hurricane. Colors bled from searing violet to murky green. The pressure of orcish belief eased, replaced by a cold hunger that prickled along his spine. The bracelet on his wrist hummed in warning. Shapes loomed ahead, not swirling clouds of emotion but silhouettes of leviathans, their outlines bristling with spines and protrusions. They moved as one, an armada of living ships cutting through both the immaterium and real space. He felt them before he saw them, a mind vast and alien, composed of countless nodes yet singular in its intent. Hunger. The tyrannid hive mind brushed his thoughts. It tasted him as it tasted all things, assessing if he were food, threat, or tool. Its curiosity was cold, a calculus of biomass and synaptic resonance. When it sensed the raw psychic energy of the Ork WAAGH and the unique resonance of his power, it turned. He emerged into real space like a spear-tip piercing flesh. One moment he was weightless in swirling energy. The next he stood on the battered hull of a kill cruiser floating amid wreckage. The void around him was a battlefield. Orc ships belched smoke and fire, their guns blazing indiscriminately. Tyrannid bioships coiled through space, launching waves of organic torpedoes that drilled into hulls and erupted in seas of acid and chitin. Boarding organisms latched onto metal and carved through it like termites through wood. The stars themselves were blotted out by the sheer number of creatures. The green of Orc psychic energy clashed with the purple of the hive mind, creating violent storms that rippled across reality. He could hear both tides in his mind, the Orcs chanting his name and the Tyrannids broadcasting hunger. For a moment he was caught between worship and consumption. With calm certainty he chose. The Orcs, for all their madness, followed because they believed he would lead them to battle. They saw him as a god of war. The Tyrannids sought only to devour. There was no negotiation, no plea, no sorrow in their minds. They were hunger incarnate. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, names of children lost to monstrous hands. He raised his hands. The iron of the kill cruiser's hull responded. It tore away in sheets, bending and folding into spears that shot through space at velocities that would have shredded any human body. They struck chitinous hulls, piercing the carapace of bioships. Acid sprayed. Alien ichor froze in the void. He reached deeper into the cores of dead ships, pulling raw iron and steel into swirling storms. Blades of jagged metal sliced through boarding organisms. He wrapped cables around the throats of monstrous creatures and tore them apart. Orcs cheered as Tyrannids exploded. Their war cries grew louder. The psychic tide of the WAAGH surged, feeding his power even as it tethered him to their belief. In the chaos, he felt the hive mind focus on him, not with fear but with calculation. He sensed synaptic tendrils thickening, carnifexes being redirected, a patriarch's mind turning. He gritted his teeth. There would be no respite. The section ended with him standing on the carcass of a bioship, its body split open like a fruit, alien spores leaking into the void. He looked out at the sea of chitin and green and understood that this battle was not about glory or worship. It was about survival. Somewhere in the cold vacuum, he whispered a promise to the children he had lost. He would not let another hunger devour those who followed him, even if they misunderstood why he fought. The battle with the Tyranids raged on for what felt like days or seconds, time blurred in the cold vacuum. Ork kill cruisers smashed into bioships, boarding them with reckless abandon. Green tides surged through organic corridors, axes meeting claws, laughter mixing with alien screeches. Above it all, he moved like a storm. Metal obeyed his every thought. Sections of ship hull folded into shields over groups of greenskins, deflecting acid streams. Broken weapons reformed in Ork hands, crude axes turning into wicked blades of hardened steel. Chitinous limbs and bony protrusions twisted and snapped under invisible pressure. He tore spines from hive tyrants and hurled them like spears into the hearts of larger beasts. He seized the iron in their blood, the trace metals in their bones, and used it to rip them apart from within. Each act of violence fed both the WAAGH and his own hatred of predators. At some point in the carnage, a massive Ork warlord, face smeared with blood and oil, stood near him on the hull of a splintered ship. The greenskin was taller than most, muscles layered upon muscles, his armor cobbled from plates of ceramite and Tyranid carapace. His eyes burned with manic joy. He raised a huge claw that crackled with stolen energy, thumped it against his chest, and bellowed something guttural. There were no quotation marks to frame his speech. The narration flowed around it. With calm certainty, he understood the intent, acknowledgement, challenge, or perhaps gratitude expressed in the only way an Ork knew. The warlord slammed his claw down again, this time on the deck before Magneto, and barked what might have been a vow. The implication hung heavy: fight with us, lead us, and we will follow your storm into any maw, even that of the hive mind. Under his breath, the names came steady and low, but this time among them were names of green-skinned warriors who had died laughing at his side. He looked at the warlord, not with the disdain he once felt for all who reveled in violence, but with an understanding born of shared battle. The Orks would fight regardless. Their belief in him gave direction to their chaos. If he abandoned them, they would either tear each other apart or continue the crusade mindlessly, feeding the gods. If he guided them, he might channel the tidal wave into battles that served to weaken those who preyed on the innocent. It was not a noble choice. It was a pragmatic one. He lifted his hand. The metal shards swirling around him fell into formation, forming an iron sigil above the battlefield. It was not a glyph of a god, but of a banner, a stylized magnet encircled by a storm. The Orks roared. Their voices shook the void. The pact was made, not in words, but in action. He would lead them, not as a god, but as a banner. They would fight by his side, not out of love, but out of shared hatred for anything that stood against their storm. The hive mind screamed in anger as the WAAGH tide turned with purpose. As the last bioship cracked and bled into the vacuum, he saw the Farseer's strand pulse at his wrist, urging him onward. There were larger wars to fight. Worlds still burned. Gods still waited. He gestured to the warlord with calm certainty, a silent command. The Ork roared, stomping his foot, relaying the word through guttural barks and slaps. The green fleet began to turn, engines roaring. The storm of belief shifted course. Together they left the debris field of Tyranid corpses and burning hulks, setting a trajectory toward the next battle, not out of hunger for loot, but because a man who refused gods and a horde that worshipped war had made a pact. The section ended with his cloak fluttering in the void, the iron banner above him glinting in starlight, his eyes fixed on the distant glimmer of the next confrontation. Their path through the void cut across the ruins of an Imperial convoy. Broken hulls drifted, lit only by sparking consoles and the cold glow of emergency beacons. Bodies floated, some still in the ceramite armor of Adeptus Astartes, others in the flak vests of Astra Militarum. The green tide paid little heed, scavenging scrap and cheering at the fire. He moved through the wreckage with solemn steps. Each corpse in power armor was a reminder of men who had believed themselves instruments of the Emperor's will, men who might have once been his allies in another life. He had fought alongside Charles Xavier's dream, then against those who hunted mutants. He had fought for Genosha, then destroyed Genosha. Now he walked among the Emperor's dead, wondering where ideology ended and survival began. The air crackled with static. A psychic pressure built, not from the hive mind or the orcs, but from something deeper, older, golden. Without warning, he felt a presence, vast, regal, suffused with sorrow and authority. It pressed against his mind like a hand, gentle yet inexorable. He did not resist. He had felt this touch once before in the arena when a chaplain had screamed the Emperor's name as he died. This time it was clearer, more direct. The voice was not spoken, nor was it the thunder of a god. It was a whisper carried on light. "You have drawn the eye of many, Eric Lenshare." It came with calm certainty. "You tear through demons with iron and will. You lead my enemies, yet you are no slave to them. Why do you persist? Why refuse rest?" The questions were simple. The weight behind them was not. He saw flashes of a man on a golden throne, wires and tubes piercing his flesh, eyes glowing with power and pain. He saw the Imperium as it was, an empire of faith and fire built upon a corpse. He saw, for a heartbeat, the Emperor as he had been, a warrior who had tried to unite humanity through strength and law and had been betrayed by his sons. There was a kinship in their sorrows, a chasm in their methods. Under his breath, the words came steady and low. His answer carried on iron and grief. "I persist because I cannot lay down my burdens while those who would enslave me still breathe. I refuse rest because rest is a gift withheld from my kind. I fight because if I stop, children die." The presence pulsed, a mixture of approval and regret. "You stand against the very gods that rend reality," it whispered. "You lead creatures whose existence is an affront to my Imperium, yet I see no taint in your soul. I see only sorrow and rage. Join us and we could end chaos. Together we could purge the warp." There was a hint of plea there, buried beneath millennia of command. He saw in that moment how tired the Emperor was, bound to his throne by duty and prophecy. How he had once been a man and had become an idea, just as Magneto was becoming an idea. He could have responded with anger. He could have laughed at the irony of an emperor asking for aid after centuries of human persecution. Instead, with calm certainty, he let his answer be a simple truth. "I will fight chaos because it threatens all life. I will fight the hive because it devours indiscriminately. I will fight your Imperium if it seeks to bind me or those under my banner. I will fight anyone who would chain free will. I kneel for no one, not for gods, not for emperors." The presence was silent for a long moment. Then a whisper like the rustle of parchment. "Very well," came the reply. "Fight then, and may our paths not cross as enemies again." The pressure lifted. The golden light receded. He stood once more among dead marines and drifting banners. In his mind, the Emperor's sigh echoed like a dying star. The section closed as he turned away, cloak brushing the floating bodies, carrying with him the weight of an empire's plea and the unyielding truth that he would always choose freedom over alliance. The Orc fleet sailed under a banner of iron through void and warp, following the filament of wraithbone like ants following a scent. They fought as they traveled, raiding smaller vessels, smashing derelicts, each battle feeding the WAGH, each victory feeding their belief. Yet in the quiet between fights, something changed. He walked among them, not from a throne, but through corridors thick with smoke and grease. Greenskins stomped aside or crashed into each other with laughter, some offering crude salutations, others hurling insults that were compliments in their culture. He ignored the jibes and focused on the machines. Orc engines were chaos made metal, pipes spewing flame, plates welded at random angles, wires sparking. They worked because orcs believed they worked. But belief alone did not protect against the void, against tyrannids, against starships that fired suns. With calm certainty, he extended his will. He took the raw iron and scrap of the kill cruisers and reshaped it, strengthening hulls, sealing gaps, forging anchors that linked ships together in formation. He created giant magnets at the core of each vessel, aligned them in fields that would resist the worst currents of the warp. He explained none of this to the Orks. He knew their minds did not care for theory. Instead, he showed them results. Engines roared louder. Guns fired straighter. Armor plates held against hits that would have torn them apart. The greenskins cheered, painting crude pictures of him over the improved hulls. They saw his work as miracles. He saw it as survival. While he bent iron, he also bent their path. He guided their raids away from human colonies teeming with civilians and toward worlds that harbored chaos cults, towards tyrannid splinter fleets. He turned their hunger for battle into assaults that bled the enemies of all. He did not tell them why. He let them believe they followed their god of metal to bigger fights. In truth, he tried to avert disaster. In the quiet of the forged decks, he also reached out to individuals. He found among the Orks certain ones, mech boys with sparks of genius behind their madness, weird boys whose psychic power crackled dangerously close to uncontrolled explosion. He approached them not as a commander, but as a fellow craftsman. He showed a mech boy how to align coils to create a railgun that would not melt after one shot. He steadied a weird boy's mind just enough to keep his head from detonating. These acts of guidance rippled through the fleet. Machines roared more efficiently. Psychic explosions became controlled bursts. The WAAGH hummed with new purpose. He whispered to the warlord between battles, not giving orders but suggestions. Point them there, hold them here, wait for my signal. The warlord would snort, smash his fist into something, then do as suggested, claiming the idea as his own. It was enough. Despite these efforts, the weight of their belief still pressed on him. The Orks chanted his name not just in battle, but as they ate, as they slept. They told tales of the iron banner that could tear planets apart. They painted his face on bullets and bombs. Each act tightened the chain he tried to loosen. He would never be free as long as they believed him a god. Yet he also knew that without that belief, their cohesion would shatter. Their crusade would fragment into warbands that would spread across the galaxy like a disease. The paradox sat heavy on his shoulders. He whispered to himself that perhaps one day he would find a way to wean them off his myth. Until then, he reforged both metal and morale, a reluctant craftsman shaping a weapon he could barely steer. The section ended with him standing in a forge lit by green flame, sparks bouncing off his cloak, the glow of molten iron reflecting sadness in his eyes. The Farseer strand led the fleet to a world ringed with defense satellites and shielded by faith. It was a forge world of the Adeptus Mechanicus, a planet-sized factory that birthed weapons for the Imperium's endless wars. Its skies were choked with smog. Its surface was a labyrinth of manufactoria, titan foundries, and cathedral spires dedicated to the Omnissiah. To the Orks, it was a treasure trove of metal and machines. To him, it was a necessary battlefield. He knew that left unchecked, the Mechanicus would build engines of war that would rain destruction on both mutants and innocents. Yet he also knew the Mechanicus would fight not just with guns, but with hymns to machine spirits and prayers that could warp reality. The Orks roared when they saw the planet. Engines flared. Gretchen shrieked. The tide descended. Initial bombardments did little. Orbital batteries on the planet's surface spat beams of light that punched through Ork hulls. Shields pulsed with void energy, deflecting crude shells. But he was not bound by crude. He reached out with his mind. He felt the magnetic fields that kept the shields stable. He twisted them. Shield generators overloaded, exploded. The Orks whooped. Kill cruisers plowed through the gap, spewing boarding torpedoes and drop pods. As the greenskins stormed the factories, the Mechanicus unleashed their titans. Towering war machines strode from immense hangars, their carapaces adorned with cogwheel emblems and binary scripture. Their footfalls were earthquakes. Their weapons were suns on stalks. Each titan's machine spirit awakened with rage at the trespassers. They spoke in roaring vox, for the Omnissiah cleansed the Xenos. He stood at the head of a swarm of warbikers, screaming across a conveyor belt the size of a city block. Titans loomed above. The ground trembled. With calm certainty, he reached into the Titan's limbs. There were metals there unknown to human science, alloys blessed by priests but still subject to the laws of magnetism. He seized them. One Titan stumbled as its knee joint locked. Another swung its plasma destructor only to find the barrel bending backward. He twisted the cabling within, causing overloads. Plasma coils ruptured, venting superheated gas into the cockpit. Tech priests shrieked prayers as holy engines betrayed them. He did not relish their deaths. He focused on disabling, on removing weapons that would obliterate thousands. Yet in the chaos, many Mechanicus soldiers died, some by Ork axes, some under collapsing gantries. He saw a Magos stand defiant, servo arms raised in benediction, before being crushed by a falling Titan. He heard prayers to the Omnissiah cut short. He felt sorrow even for those who had sought his death. Amid this, he glimpsed a different fight. Mutant workers, enslaved by the Mechanicus, cowered in pits. Their limbs were replaced with crude augmetics, electrolashes cracked. For a heartbeat, the battle around him blurred. He saw the faces of mutants who had once looked to him for salvation. He remembered Genosha's rubble. He remembered being called a terrorist for defending his people. The rage that had driven him through Auschwitz and beyond surged. Under his breath, the names came steady and low. He reached out, ripping the electrolashes from tech priests' hands, bending cages apart. Mutants blinked, eyes adjusting to a world without bars. He nodded once. They fled into the chaos, some following Orks with nowhere else to go. The Mechanicus world groaned as its infrastructure crumbled. Factories collapsed. Titans fell. The Ork roar was deafening. But over it all, he heard the hum of the warp. Each act of destruction, each death fed the gods. He tasted ash in his mouth. The section ended with the world burning. Its foundries turned to slag. Mutants running free under a sky filled with smoke and iron banners, while he whispered apologies to the machine spirits he had silenced and to the souls he could not save. News of the Forge World's fall rippled through the Imperium like a shockwave. On Terra, the High Lords argued louder. Inquisitorial vaults reverberated with prayers and curses. The Adeptus Astartes clamored for vengeance. The Grey Knights, guardians against the warp's horrors, received orders sealed with the sigil of the Lord Commander himself. Intercept the banner of iron before it reached a world closer to the heart of humanity. They were not to engage recklessly. They were to infiltrate, to sever the head from the WAGH without alerting the greenskin horde. A ship of sleek silver broke from the moons of Titan, cloaked in wards and sanctified, its hull inscribed with litanies that burned demons on contact. It slipped through the warp quietly, following the disturbances left by the Ork fleet. Days or perhaps minutes later, as the greenskins prepared to assault another void station, alarms blared in his mind. Not from the WAGH, not from the warp, but from the bracelet's subtle pulses. A presence had slipped aboard one of the kill cruisers, something quiet and deadly, masked by faith so strong it cut through the green fog of Ork psychic noise. He walked down dark corridors lined with dangling chains and dripping oil. His boots made no sound. He felt the press of disciplined minds, each a fortress of prayer. Grey Knights moved through the ship like shadows, bolters silenced, swords shrouded. Their armor gleamed faintly, script glowing along edges. They moved toward him, drawn by the beacon of his power. In their helmets he saw no fear, only duty etched onto faces that had stared down demons. The first knight emerged from the shadows, storm bolter raised. With calm certainty he extended a hand. The gun's magazine twisted, bolts jammed. The weapon exploded inward. The knight staggered, but another stepped forward, power sword cutting through air that crackled with psychic force. He bent the blade away, the steel warping under his will, but the knight did not release it. They were not Orks. They would not laugh as they died. They recited litanies as they fought, their voices steady. Emperor, preserve us from the witch. He heard their words not as insults, but as prayers. He felt the depth of their conviction. They had willingly sacrificed their humanity to fight the warp. In another life, he might have respected them. In this moment, they were here to kill him. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, mourning for warriors who would not be swayed. He did not seek to slaughter them. He sought to disable, to end the fight without feeding the gods. He twisted armor joints, pinned swords to ceilings, magnetized the ceramite plates so they stuck to bulkheads. He plucked bolter shells from the air and turned them into shackles. Yet the gray knights kept coming, each one chanting, each one stepping over fallen brothers with calm certainty. In the psychic din, he felt something else, a mind among them brighter, colder, a presence like ice, a justicar perhaps or a librarian. It reached into the warp, sending a lance of nullifying power toward him. A spear of the Emperor's will meant to sever his connection to metal, to freeze his power. Pain flared. For an instant, his grip on the iron around him faltered. A knight lunged, sword poised. He remembered Auschwitz. He remembered sentinels. He remembered the faces of his children. Rage flowed. He seized the lance of psychic power itself, felt the iron within the blood of the librarian, and bent it. The knight screamed without sound as his own power backlashed. He dropped. The remaining warriors hesitated. In that heartbeat, he could have crushed them. Instead, he spoke, not with words but with thought. "Leave. I do not wish to kill you. Tell your Primarch I will not stop fighting until I can live free." The Grey Knights withdrew, dragging their wounded, their devotion shaken but not broken. As they vanished into the void, he felt a flicker of respect. They had fought not for gods but for humanity. He wondered if humanity would ever see him as anything but a monster. The section ended with him standing alone in the shadowed corridor, the oil drip like a metronome, his heart steadying as he listened to the distant roar of Orks, oblivious to the battle that had just unfolded above their heads. Not every world that their storm touched was a forge of the Mechanicus or a hive of Tyranids. The Wraithbone filament led them at times to fringe colonies, places where imperial rule existed only as a tithe or a distant threat, where humans lived in mud huts under the shadow of Manufactoria or in hive slums forgotten by governors. These were not targets he would have chosen if he had been alone. The Farseer's path wove between larger dangers, and sometimes that meant crossing inhabited worlds. The Orc saw settlements as loot to be taken or burned. He saw something else, faces not unlike those that had once looked to him for salvation on Earth. Under the grime and fear, he recognized the curve of human smiles, the set of shoulders burdened by survival. He recognized mutations hidden under rags, children with extra digits, mothers with glimmering eyes, men whose skins shimmered, mutants yet still human. The Imperium called them abominations, the Orcs called them fun. When their fleet descended on one such world, the ground shook with the impact of drop ships. Orcs poured out, guns blazing, laughter echoing. He stood between greenskins and refugees, iron swirling. He used his power not to kill Orcs, but to redirect, twisting barrels upward, jamming triggers, knocking axes from hands. Orcs yelled in confusion as weapons refused to work. Some turned on each other, brawling for sport. Others followed his gestures, redirecting their rage toward the fortress of a local governor who had hoarded food while his people starved. Walls of stone and ceramite crumbled. The governor's enforcers fled. He found the man cowering under a table piled with tithes, food, water, lasguns, and a stack of purity seals. He lifted the table, let the man stare at him and see not a demon, but a mutant, the kind the governor's propaganda had said deserved death. He did not kill him. He left him to face his own people. It was not mercy, it was justice of a sort. He turned to the refugees. Some backed away, fear in their eyes. Others reached out, hope flickering. A child stepped forward, hand glowing faintly, a minor psyker who would have been executed if the Imperium had found her. She looked at him with wide eyes, and for a heartbeat he saw Anya. Under his breath, the names came steady and low, his daughters among them. He knelt, not in submission, but to meet the child's gaze. He took a piece of metal, melted it with a thought, and shaped it into a bracelet like his own, simple, smooth, a circle. He placed it on her wrist. "This is not a weapon," he said within the narration's flow, "but a reminder that you deserve to exist." Her smile was small and cracked, but it was real. He straightened, turned back to the Orcs, who were now celebrating the destruction of the governor's palace by setting fire to his banners. They cheered for their metal god who had given them a new fight. He walked away, cloak heavy with ash, knowing he could not save every colony, but vowing to save what he could when the war allowed. The section ended with his eyes lifting toward the stars, where distant worlds still suffered unseen, his heart pulled between the desire to stop and the necessity to continue. The whispers of humanity's plight joined the chants of greenskins and the sighs of ghosts, a chorus he could neither silence nor ignore. As the crusade grew, so too did its psychic resonance. The warp churned under the pressure. Storms of green lightning crackled on the fleet's fringes. Navigators aboard Imperial ships miles away went blind as sudden eruptions of energy turned calm currents into maelstroms. Farseers sending messages through the webway felt the tug, like threads being pulled toward a vortex. On their own ships, weird boys foamed at the mouth, their heads swelling with power drawn from the growing waagh. He felt it too, a pressure building behind his eyes, a taste of copper at the back of his throat. Each chant of his name fed the storm. Each battle cry amplified it. The gods of chaos leaned closer, tongues out to taste the power. He realized, with a dread that coiled in his gut, that he had become not just a leader, but a nexus. The belief of millions was not just a chain, it was a battery feeding the Imperium. The more they fought, the stronger the storm grew. The stronger the storm grew, the more the gods fed. It was a vicious cycle, and he stood at its center. With calm certainty, he knew he had to break it or risk becoming the very thing he fought, a god in truth, sustained by worship, bound by it. He began to test ways to dampen the belief. He ordered the warlord to stop chanting his name before battles. The warlord laughed, thinking it a joke. He tried explaining to a mech boy the dangers of their psychic field. The mech boy scratched his head and asked if he could make bigger guns with it. He attempted to stand before a mob and speak with calm certainty that he was not a god. The orcs roared with delight, taking his statement as humility, proof of his divinity. He tried silence. The silence became scripture. He tried absence. The absence became a holy mystery. Every attempt to lessen belief twisted into reinforcement. Despair nibbled at the edges of his resolve. In a moment of rare vulnerability, he considered a dark solution. If he could not break the waagh field by words, perhaps he could by force. If he killed enough orcs, if he destroyed the warbands that chanted his name, would the storm dissipate? He pictured smashing skulls of creatures who laughed in the face of death, creatures who had followed him not out of fear but out of joy. He saw their faces painted with his glyph, their belief pure in its simplicity. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, weighing the cost. He had become what humans had feared, a mutant who could crush armies. Now he contemplated slaughtering those who worshipped him to prevent a greater catastrophe. The thought sickened him. He remembered Genosha again, the metal bending around sentinels, the mutants he had killed trying to save many more. The cycle was all too familiar. His fists clenched. The iron around him hummed in response. At that moment, the Farseer's strand pulsed. A thought brushed his mind, tentative. The Eldar offered a solution, risky and subtle. Perhaps, the whisper suggested, belief could be redirected rather than extinguished. Perhaps a ritual could anchor the waagh field into a construct, bleed it off like pressure from a boiler. Perhaps he could let the orcs continue their chants while channeling their energy into something that would not feed the gods directly. It would require trusting alien magic and technology. It would require giving the Eldar a measure of influence over the Crusade's fate. It would require stepping into another web of prophecy. The section closed with him weighing options, the hum of orcish war drums in his ears, the taste of copper in his mouth, knowing that either choice carried the risk of becoming what he despised or failing those he sought to protect. He answered the Farseer's whisper with a thought that was both resignation and hope. "Show me." The Eldar guide responded by projecting images into his mind, a world hidden within the webway, a pocket reality sculpted from wraithbone, a place where psychic energy could be redirected and dissipated harmlessly. It would require leading the Orc fleet through a specific portal under a precise set of circumstances. It would require the cooperation of the warlord and the weirdboys. It would require his own will to act as a conduit, channeling the waagh field through his body into the wraithbone constructs. The Eldar did not hide the risks. The ritual could kill him, could shatter the wraithbone and unleash the very storm they sought to tame. It could also succeed, bleeding off the green tide of belief, freeing him from some portion of their worship, starving the gods of a feast. It was a gambit, a moment balanced on a knife's edge. With calm certainty, he approached the warlord. He did not give orders. He presented a challenge. "We can fight a greater enemy," he said within the narration's flow, "but to get there we must go through a portal the spiky gets fear." The warlord's eyes widened, gleaming with greed and hunger. "Spiky get portal," he bellowed. "Smash it. Kill it." He nodded. The orcs prepared. They loaded guns and filled holds with squigs. The weirdboys howled with anticipation, their heads already crackling with green lightning. He stood among them, feeling the pulsing tide. He glanced at the bracelet, at the wraithbone strand. He took a breath and whispered names into the storm. The fleet plunged into the portal. The webway was a labyrinth of impossible angles and singing tunnels. Eldar constructs shaped the space, their architecture like bone and crystal fused. The orc ships, crude and massive, barely fit. Grot crews screamed as walls scraped hulls. He stood at the prow of the lead vessel, eyes closed, arms outstretched. He felt the WAGH field build, the orcs chanting louder as they sensed the eldritch beauty around them and mistook it for a challenge. At the appointed place, he gave the signal. Weirdboys released their power into him. Green lightning crackled across his skin. Every chant, every laugh, every stomp of a boot fed into the storm that swirled within his body. Pain seared, his muscles locked. For a heartbeat, he glimpsed the inside of the webway, souls in crystals, paths leading to craft worlds, the yawning maw of the warp held at bay by Wraithbone. He directed the storm into the conduits the Eldar had built. The Wraithbone glowed, absorbing the green energy like a sponge. It sang, a high-pitched keening that threatened to shatter his skull. The orcs cheered, thinking this new sound part of the fight. He screamed without voice, every nerve aflame, not from demon claws but from belief. It worked. Slowly, the pressure in his mind eased. The storm flowed through him and into the constructs, dispersing into the webway like mist into air. He felt lighter, as if a chain had been loosened, not broken but given slack. The weirdboys collapsed, smoke rising from their ears, alive but exhausted. The warlord roared, victorious simply because something loud had happened. The Farseer's presence hovered at the edge of perception, relief tempered by caution. The gods tasted less power for now. He sagged against a bulkhead, breath ragged. He knew this was a temporary reprieve. Orc belief would build again. Battles would stoke the storm anew. But for the first time since he had arrived in this galaxy, he felt something akin to hope. He had taken a step toward freeing himself from worship without murdering those who gave it. The section ended with him staring down the last stretch of webway tunnel, the light beyond flickering with unknown dangers, the hum of drained psychic energy echoing like a sigh. The webway spit them out at the edge of the Eye of Terror once more, but this time the fleet was not the undisciplined wave that had plunged into the warp-seeking blood. It moved with purpose, magnets aligned, hulls reinforced, weirdboys drained but alive. He stood at the prow, cloak snapping in the void, eyes fixed on the swirling storm that marked the wound in reality. The eye pulsed like a heart, its colors shifting in sickly patterns. Demonic faces formed and dissolved in its surface. Through the Farseer's strand, he sensed Eldar concern and Imperial dread. He had not intended to return so soon, yet every path he had followed led here. The gods had felt his defiance. They had tasted his refusal to kneel, and they had responded with increasing pressure. He could retreat no longer. If he did not strike at the source, the cycle would repeat until he either bowed or broke. With calm certainty, he raised his hand. The iron banner unfurled above the fleet. Orcs roared. Engines flared. They plunged into the eye. The warp embraced them like fire. Immediately, demonic hosts descended, not just of blood, but of change and pleasure and rot. Tzeentch hurled labyrinthine spells, reality folding in on itself. Slaanesh sent waves of excess, trying to drown will in sensation. Nurgle blanketed hulls with corrosive plagues. He was at the center, iron swirling like a hurricane. He bent spells back on themselves. He twisted pleasure into numbness. He froze rot in place. But the gods were not content with sending servants. They manifested aspects, avatars carved from pure emotion. a great avian head cawed with laughter, its beak dripping formulas. A serpentine figure coiled around the fleet, its touch searing nerves. A bloated giant waddled forward, its belly splitting to unleash swarms of flies. He fought them as best he could, bending warp-made metal, ripping apart conjured chains. Orks leapt from ships onto demon backs, axes raised, laughter ringing even in the void. The WAAGH field built again, this time directed through him and into the wraithbone anchor, diffusing some of the storm. It was not enough. Amidst the chaos, a voice like 1,000 whispers cut through. "You should have taken my offer," sneered Tzinch, its laughter layered like pages fluttering. "See what your stubbornness brings." He ignored the taunts. Another voice, sultry and cruel, purred that pleasure would end his sorrow. He ignored that as well. Rot mocked him with promises of inevitability. He lifted entire shipwrecks with a thought and hurled them into the avatars. He bent reality around his fists, turning spells into blades. Yet the gods were endless. He was one man, the bracelet glowed, the Eldar strand sang, the Orc chants thundered, the Eye of Terror itself seemed to pulse with his heartbeat. In that moment he realized he could not destroy the gods. They were fed by billions of souls. He could, however, wound them, show them that a single will could defy them. He reached deeper than he ever had, past the iron and steel into the core of the warp. He felt its magnetic essence, the currents that bound belief and matter. He seized them. For a heartbeat, reality froze. Demons paused mid-lunge. Orcs hung suspended, mouths open in eternal laughter. He twisted. He did not try to tear the warp apart. He twisted its currents like wires rerouted, creating a knot. The eye throbbed. Waves of energy rippled outward. The avatars screamed as their forms distorted. Tzinch's head blurred, Slaanesh's coils frayed, Nurgle's body erupted in blooms of metal rather than fungi. He felt the gods recoil, not in fear but in surprise. He had altered their playing field. The Orcs roared as if thunder had answered them. He held the knot for as long as he could, muscles shaking, mind fraying. Then the backlash hit. The knot snapped back. A shockwave blasted through the fleet. Ships spun. Orcs were flung against walls. He fell to his knees on the deck, blood trailing from his nose. The eye shrank, then rebounded, its colors shifting violently. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then the warp screamed. The section ended with him struggling to his feet as demons shrieked and gods howled, knowing he had provoked them in ways no mortal should, and that their retaliation would be terrible. The shockwave threw him into the hull, iron shards biting into his back. His head rang. The world blurred. For a moment he did not know where he was. Auschwitz, Genosha, the arena, the eye. All war was won. He tasted blood and ash. He felt hands pulling him up, green, rough hands that reeked of oil and sweat. The warlord grinned down at him, fangs glinting. "Spiky gets angry, boss," the Orc might have said with a laugh, meaning gods enraged. He pushed himself upright, feeling every bone protest. Around him the battle resumed. Demons swarmed, Orcs charged, the gods bellowed, but something had shifted. The warp currents did not flow as smoothly. There were eddies now, knots he had made that slowed the tide. The wraithbone anchor hummed. The chants still fed the storm, but less so. It was not victory, it was a crack. He realized then that freedom was not a single act, not a battle one. It was a process of breaking chains, link by link, even as new ones were forged. He would never destroy the warp, but he could scar it. He would never silence belief, but he could redirect it. He would never stop fighting, but he could choose where and why. Under his breath, the words came steady and low, not names of the dead this time, but a promise to himself. "I will not become what they fear. I will not let their faith make me a tyrant. I will fight until there is no breath left in me, and then, perhaps, I will find rest." The gods had been wounded. They would not forget. They would send more champions. The Imperium would redouble its efforts to kill or recruit him. Eldar would watch with wary hope. Orcs would chant louder, believing his refusal to kneel proof of divinity. Tyranids would come again. Each step forward would bring new enemies. Yet for the first time he felt a sliver of control, not over others, but over his own path. He turned to the warlord and with calm certainty pointed away from the eye. There were other battles to fight, other chains to break. The warlord roared and the fleet wheeled, leaving the screaming wound behind, engines burning. In the heart of the eye, gods fumed. In the silent void, stars watched. On his ship, a man known as Magneto closed his eyes for a heartbeat, drawing in a breath that tasted of oil and ozone, a breath free of prayer, free of command, simply his own. The section closed there with a soft emotional handoff, the hint of rest amid chaos, the promise of battles yet to come, and the enduring truth that even in a universe of gods and monsters, a single will could alter destiny. If you hunger for more tales of impossible encounters in the dark millennium, smash that subscribe button, and the Emperor protects those who support the channel.